Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio. Today I'm going to be reviewing a two-player abstract asymmetric game called Pathogen. In Pathogen, one player is playing the side of the doctors, while the other player is placing the side of the plague. But again, it's an abstract game, so theme is not too forward, and it has some interesting elements of movement and player powers, and let me just show you how the game works. Then we'll come back here and I will let you know what I think. Okay, here we see Pathogen set up. This is a two-player asymmetric game. And to set the game up, what you're going to do is you're going to take one of these tiles, okay? There are a number of them. They are double-sided, and you can randomly choose them. Each one is called a quadrant, and you'll put four of them together to create the game board. The other thing that you're going to do is you're going to kind of seed the board with particular pieces. The first thing that's going to happen is that the plague player, which is the red pieces, is going to place out four of their tokens on the board. They're going to place one in each quadrant, and although this is not printed in the first edition rules, it is something that has been suggested by the publisher on Board Game Geek, that when you place these, you place them so that they are in different rows and columns from each other. Okay, it just makes the game a little bit more balanced. Once those tokens are out, then the doctor player is going to start by placing their doctor piece on one of the white squares. Then the plague player will place their plague piece on one of the white squares. The doctor player will place the angel on one of the black squares. The plague will place their devil token on one of the black squares. The doctor player will place one of their tokens here on one of the 9 inner squares, and the red player will be the first one to take their turn. What is the goal of the game? The goal of the game is to win with one of two different win conditions. One of the ways you can win is by having a continuous line of your pieces, either these tokens or these settlements, that connect both sides of the board either horizontally or vertically. Okay? So if you have an uninterrupted line of your pieces, not including your tokens, it's either going to be these pieces or your settlements from vertically or horizontally connecting both sides of the board. That's one condition, win condition. The other win condition is by building all four of your settlements, and these have to be built in different quadrants, okay? So you can never have two of your own settlements in one quadrant. Either one of those will trigger the end game. All right, so how does a turn play out? A turn is taken with 3 phases. First you have the panel phase, then you have the character phase, and then you have the token phase. And the plague player will be the first one to take a turn. That's why their little piece is off the board here. So this is what's called the movement board. And as I said, the doctor player had placed one of their pieces on this inner squares and put the token on top of that, the movement token. Now what will happen is the red player will put this token on any one of the squares other than the one that it's on, okay? The plague player has access to these outside squares, whereas the doctor player does not. That's why these are colored in red. And that's one of the ways that makes the game asymmetric, all right? So let's say that it did something like, I'm trying to think of, let's say that it did something like this, okay? So it put its token over there. That means that this is going to be moving from here to here. And it has to take the shortest route available. So there are multiple options there, okay? You could go 1, 2 left and 1, 2 up. That's 4 movements. You can go up 2 and over left 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's also 2 movements. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can go up 1, over 2, up 1. So you've got multiple options there, but it just has to be one of the shortest movements. Once you have determined which kind of route you're going to take, you then will pick one of the pieces on the board and move in that way. As I said, the doctor and the plague are only moving on white squares, and the angel and devil are only moving on black squares. The white and the black squares don't interact with each other at all. So let's say, for example, that in this case, the plague player is going to use this piece to take that movement. And again, it could have gone up 2 and over 2 and up, over left 2 and up 2, up, over, up. It has options, okay? Let's say that it chose to go up 1, over 2, and up 1, okay? So it'll choose this piece, and it's only moving on white squares. up 1, over 2, and up 1, okay? Now that it's done that, it's going to take the token phase. And if you look at the card here, it's going to show you how many token actions you have, which is 4 for the Plague player. So they've got 4 of these tokens that they're going to place. Now, one of the asymmetric portions of the game is that when the Plague player puts out its tokens, it has to do so in a way that is as equal as possible, and you never place in the square that you ended on. You can place in the square you started on, but not the square you ended on. So it went up 1, over 2, and up 1, and it started here. Up 1, over 1, 2. It can't place on the square it ended, so now this last token can go on any of these 3. Let's say, for example, it just went ahead and placed it there. Now, if one of the doctor's tokens had been placed already on one of those squares, instead of placing, it could have removed one as one of its actions and then potentially placed one of theirs in the spot that was vacated by theirs. So that shows you all 3 elements of a turn. The panel phase, where you place a token or move your token that's already on the board somewhere else. Then you choose one of your 2 characters and move in that way, and then you place tokens. So a couple of things. As I mentioned, the Plague player has to place theirs in as even a way as possible. The Doctor does not have that requirement. What their requirement is that they have to remove tokens before they can place tokens. So being the Doctor player, their priority is to remove tokens. So they don't have the option to just place them before removing. So if they're in a position where they can remove tokens, they have to. The other thing that is a bit asymmetric is that they've got 5 token actions as opposed to the 4 that the Plague Doctor has. So let's say, for example, that the Doctor on their turn went ahead and placed like so. They just went down 1, okay? Down 1. If they chose this token, they would move down 1, and they've got 5 tokens to place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They could place all 5 there. To place a settlement, whenever 6 tokens are in one spot, they get removed and replaced by a settlement. So you can see the Doctor is already very close to having a settlement in that spot. So they've got the opportunity, they've got the ability to place as many tokens as they want in each spot that they pass through, unlike the Plague Doctor does in their token phase. Okay? So also, if settlements are out on the board, they block movement from the other player only, again, on those appropriately colored squares. So if a settlement was placed here, it would be blocking movement from the Plague player on the white squares. Okay? And you can't make a movement on the board that doesn't have a corresponding element out here. You can't do an invalid movement turn. All right? One other kind of quirk that is asymmetric is that if the Doctor player ever places in the center square here, what they can do at that point is rotate this movement board in such a way that it kind of changes the orientation of how things are played out here. And also, on the following turn, the Plague player is now locked in to those 9 inner squares. They can't utilize those until the following turn. And that is shown here at the top of these little player aid cards, along with a little bit of an idea on how the movement could work on these. Okay? So players are going to be taking alternating turns, going through those 3 phases until one of the 2 win conditions are met. Either every one of your settlements built on each of the 4 quadrants, or a contiguous line of pieces that connect horizontally or vertically across the board. All right, that's how the game is played. Let's head back over and I'll let you know what I think. Okay, well there you have Pathogen. At least I hope you have a decent idea on how the game works. One of the things I'm going to mention right off the bat is that there are a couple of elements of the game that can be a little bit tricky to wrap your mind around. Primarily the movement. The movement board can be a little bit difficult to explain to new players, and it can be a little bit difficult to kind of grasp within your first play. Within a couple of turns, I think it becomes a bit more intuitive, but it is something that's a little bit tricky. And if you felt a little bit confused during the overview, that's not terribly surprising because it is something that is a little bit unintuitive the first couple of times you're exposed to it. All right, so first off, let me talk a little bit about the art and the components in the game. Art is almost non-existent, so it really is not even something I'm going to necessarily bring up too much. Let's just talk about the components. And I think the components are very, very nice. This is a small box, okay? And they pack quite a bit in this little box. The quality of the cardboard tiles are very nice. The wooden components are terrific. They're screen printed, and they do the job very, very well. I feel like it is an aesthetic that fits kind of this theme. It has some little kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It kind of touches on familiar abstracts with black and white imagery, squares. I mean, that kind of screams abstract, but it also has some nice little thematic touches with the Plague Doctor pieces and things along those lines. It's a nice looking game, a nice tactile feel, which is something I think is especially important in abstract games where, you know, theme is not going to be forward. It's nice if you feel like you are enjoying interacting tactily with the physical pieces on the board. So very, very nice job with the art and the components. The player aid cards are good, not great. I understand that, you know, you have to have, you know, language independent and primarily is going to be what we're looking for here because, you know, it would not make a whole lot of sense to have a number of different language cards, especially when you only have one card for each player. The iconography is fine. Once you kind of understand how the game works, you can refer to that card and it'll do its job. I think it can be a little bit confusing when you're still trying to get the concepts of the game down, but once you have them, they do the job of kind of reminding you what some of the different aspects are for each side of the game, because again, there is an asymmetric nature to it. All right, so let's talk about the gameplay itself. As I mentioned right off the bat, this is a game that has a little bit of a learning curve to it. The core concept of the game, the core rules of the game are not terribly complex. It's not one that is it's not a heavy rule set by any means. And I do really like the two different win conditions. I feel like a lot of times in two-player abstract games, you can get into these kind of stalematey positions, and having two different things to think about, I think helps alleviate that to an extent. So I really like that aspect of the game. I like the asymmetric nature of the game. The game is such that the red player, the plague player, starts at a bit of an advantage. They've got board presence already, and they're also taking the first turn. I think for that reason, it is important that you utilize the publisher's kind of recommendation. It's not in the printed rule book that when those 4 initial tokens are placed for the plague player, that they're in different rows and columns. That helps a bit. It's not game breaking, but it helps alleviate a little bit that feeling of a first player advantage that the red player looks like they may have. I don't think there really is a first player advantage. I just think that it helps alleviate and makes it more clear to the blue player, especially if they're not someone that's played the game a lot, that they should be focusing on removing those red tokens first, more than worrying about putting their own tokens out. Because again, the red starts with some board presence. So, bit of a learning curve, especially with that movement board. But I think that it's worth it, because I think that element of the game, this kind of idea of you've got these 2 boards, that movement board and the main game area, that is really clever. And it leads to some potential AP. So you have to be aware of that, because you have to be thinking about, okay, my movement is over here, but it's going to be interacting with this main board. So I have to make sure that I've got one of my pieces that can actually make this movement that I'm putting out here on the movement board. And what's going to be the most efficient way for me to get my tokens out or to remove the other player's tokens. There's a very brain burnery aspect to this game. It's a abstract that has a lot of interaction, obviously, because you're just head-to-head playing with another player, but there is a bit of a head-down element too as well, where you are really trying to come up with some clever plays, and sometimes that can lock up a player's brain in this. That's not necessarily out of place in a 2-player abstract game. I think a lot of 2-player abstract games kind of can lend themselves to this. But the 2 win conditions, as I mentioned a moment ago, kind of helps alleviate a bit of that lockdown feeling. But very, very clever. I love the way that that movement board works. I like the fact that the Doctor player is restricted in its movement to those inner 9 squares, but that if it goes to the center square, it can rotate and change the orientation. That's a really, really neat element. But for most of the game, the Plague player, the red player, is going to have more availability in their movement because they've got those outer squares that they can utilize. That gives them more, they can get more dramatic sweeps across the board. But that's counteracted with the fact that they only have 4 token actions, whereas the Doctor player has 5. So the game does feel balanced to me. I don't know, I can't say that definitively, but it does feel balanced to me because all of the things that kind of make things asymmetric, the red player starting with a position of power on the board, but they have fewer actions they can take, fewer token actions they can take. The fact that the Doctor is limited in their movement, but they've got that center space that allows them to manipulate the movement board. All of those things make the game feel relatively balanced to me. Very clever game, one that I feel stands out in the 2-player abstract genre. So with all of this being said, I'm going to be giving Pathogen an 8 out of 10. I really like this game, and 2-player games are not necessarily my jam, and abstract games are hit and miss with me, but there's something about this one, just the uniqueness of it, the fact that it can really lead to some clever plays, the fact that I like playing as both the Doctor and the Plague, really make this one stand out. I do feel like this is a game where somebody who has played it multiple times, teaching a new player, is very likely to beat them and to beat them relatively soundly. But again, I think that that is a hallmark of this genre. I think that is the case in many, maybe most 2-player abstract games. So I don't think it's necessarily a bigger problem in Pathogen than it is in others, but it is something that I am going to mention. And the fact that it has a bit of a learning curve is also something that might make it less accessible than other 2-player or abstract games that you'd find out there. But really clever game. Standing out in this field is something that gives it a lot of credence to me, so an 8 out of 10 for Pathogen. All right, well, that's it for me. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from the Dice Tower Midwest Annex.